You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christi and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody. We are talking today about the movie Once. I had never heard of this movie. This is a recommendation from our youngest son, Cameron, who is also the editor of this podcast. And he suggested when we said that we were going to do Irish films, he said, "Oh, are you going to do Once?" So we looked it up.
We looked it up twice, I think.
This film came out in 2007. The director is John Carney. Very Irish name. And it stars Glenn Hansard.
Hansard, maybe?
Hansard. Yes, I will butcher names throughout this podcast. Most people know him from The Commitments and Margeta Irgulava.
I think that's Middle European of some sort. I would butcher it too. Don't worry about it.
And Hugh Walsh were the main stars. Notable crew is the two leads in this, who were credited as guy and girl, were also the composers.
Yeah, I think they're both musicians before and after the film.
And this film was largely shot in Dublin, Ireland.
And I don't know how to recognize that other than saying it did look like Dublin, so I'll give them that.
Mm-hmm. The synopsis is a modern-day musical, and I'm going to talk about that later, about a busker and an immigrant and their eventful week in Dublin as they write, rehearse, and record songs that tell their love story.
I don't think I've ever heard the word busker outside of a movie context.
Did you look it up?
I did not, oddly enough.
Okay, in the show notes, we will have a definition of busker. So I want to talk about, they call this a modern day musical, and in film school, I clearly remember a conversation that we had about the difference between a movie that has music in it and a musical. And the big difference is if the characters are citing dialogue in the song, and if the song informs the storyline, that's a musical. If there just happens to be music in the film, that's just a film with music.
And I would say that even if the lyrics of the song affect the story itself or communicate something, I still think it's not a musical unless the dialogue is sung. That's just my opinion.
Yes. And there were a couple times I guess we could just talk about them now while we're on this topic. There were two times that this film kind of veered into that musical category, but I think overall, and let me say, I loved the music in this film. The other day I was playing it while I was working. It's great. It's a great soundtrack, but there were two times that I felt that it did kind of veer into that musical category. They were on a bus, and she asks about a former love that she has identified as the one he's pining for. And she asks, I think, if she still lives here or what happened to her. She asks him a question about her, and he starts singing kind of his answer to her. And so that kind of...
I would say, yeah, but I think that still works as just a song that happens to be in the movie.
Yeah, it's on the bubble. It's on the bubble. And then the other time that was a hilarious scene, and maybe we'll circle back to, is it's evening. She's walking out of a convenience store, and I believe she's walking to a recording session with him, and she starts singing, and she's kind of singing about him. It's very music video from the 80s, and she's talking about how much she does care for him in the song. And so that kind of felt very musical-like. But for the most part, this is a great movie with some great music in it. Mike, let's start out with your pickup line. How does the movie begin?
The first line is, "The healing has begun." And in fact, it's sung. It's a lyric that he sings while busking. I think that's the appropriate form of that verb. And I think that actually is informative of kind of what's going on because, no spoilers here, but the two characters heal themselves in some sense over the course of the film, even though they don't have redemptive love where the love between them heals them.
That was a lot. I have to really take that in.
So I will also make the note that it was about 1 minute in that we get the first F word. And so apparently maybe the Irish are as fond of it as the Scots, I suppose. There is quite a bit of saltiness in that, which I think is actually accurate for regular working class people.
Well, they are adjacent countries, so it makes sense that they would share a love for the F word. The cinematography of this film reminded me very much of my film school friends and I when we would have an assignment and we didn't have time to deal with permits or clearances or asking permission to film places, and we would just set up a camera and start filming. So I found this delightful. Some might be bumped by this, but the opening scene was so reminiscent of this. The camera is on one side of the street and our actor is on the other side, which kind of gives it a really cool gritty feel. But then this white panelless van goes by and it's extra long. And so you can just tell that the cameraman, or the director is standing just like, son of a... Yeah.
Yeah, one of the advantages of shooting in Dublin is that the clouds serve as nature's softbox. So you get some gorgeous soft light by filming in areas that aren't super sunny. So even though Hollywood got its start because it was clear and sunny a lot, actually I think the lighting is more gorgeous in this case because they didn't spend money on lights. They just used natural and practical lights.
Yeah. The other time that I noticed this type of filmmaking that kind of warmed my heart is they're sitting in a cafe and the camera is outside the cafe and our characters are inside the cafe. And so we can hear them pretty clearly, but it's obvious that it's almost like a voyeuristic a little bit. Like we're watching them kind of, and it's early in their relationship. And so we're watching kind of like that subtle flirting that people do when they're just kind of meeting. And the only thing that I found distracting by it was there was a major reflection on the window. So I could see like the guy walking across the street and it would sometimes pull me out of their conversation. But once again, as a film student, I appreciated this.
What I thought was interesting was there was a scene where she goes out in the evening to get batteries and she's walking back from the little bodega or whatever. And the lights themselves are all entirely there, except that she's going kind of in and out of being lit. So you can see light from the street lights. They look like the sodiums, I think, because they kind of that orangish tint to them. But then you would see her become lit and not lit and lit and not lit. And so maybe it was cars. I think sometimes it was vehicles moving past. And of course, if they didn't pull permits to close the street, there would be cars. But other times it wasn't really obvious to me what it was. I thought, is it possible that there is an assistant with an iPhone flashlight or, on her face or something? But that was really kind of interesting, just the way that scene played out. And I don't think she was singing as the character, but there was music over it. So it's a fairly long and extended sequence with this different lighting. And that was really kind of an interesting effect, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the scene I was talking about. And now I can't remember. You're making me doubt myself. But I thought she was singing. Maybe she was singing, but it was like ADR. So that's what made it feel like a music video. Is she's walking down the street and we hear her voice. We now know in the film that that's her voice, but maybe her mouth wasn't moving. So
was that the part where you wanted to talk about diegetic versus non-diegetic? Because I think there's at one point in the film where she starts singing as the character and then the song continues, but the character isn't singing.
Yeah. Little film school inside, everybody. There's a big word I use, and you can use it at dinner parties if you want to sound like you're all in the know of film. And that's diegetic versus non-diegetic. And we've all seen the movies. Often movies open with a song. And so you hear the soundtrack while the film is opening and maybe the person is going to their car, they're getting ready for work. We see them going about their day. And oftentimes movie makers will play with this because sometimes the song just trails off. And that's a non-diegetic song. It's not part of the film. The way you know is if the character hears the song or not. And so if it's just a sound bed that is meant for the audience only, that's non-diegetic. And then when my favorite thing that some filmmakers will do is you have a piece of music that is serving non-diegetic, but then oftentimes, or maybe not often, but sometimes in films, the character will lean over and turn off the music and it will stop suddenly. And so it's like, oh, they just made the music diegetic. So there's your fun film fact.
Yeah, if you drop diegetic in a conversation, chances are the other person's not going to know what you're talking about. You'll sound like you're a smarty pants.
Yeah, there you go. That's my gift to you. I thought it was interesting kind of moving into the writing. The characters have first names. Do you remember them?
I don't know. I don't remember them ever being spoken. I thought they weren't.
They were. But they are credited as guy and girl. And another thing that we learned in film school is even your supporting cast and sometimes your extras, give them a name, because those actors like they want their character to have a name. So I found it very interesting that these two leads in the credits were listed as guy and girl.
Yeah, security guard number 3 isn't as appealing to an actor as Bob McEnroe or something like that.
I thought it was funny too, because I think one of the drunks in the bar had a name, but they didn't credit.
I think everyone else in the film had a name except for guy and girl.
Yeah, there's a story there.
Yeah, and there's a theory running around the internet that Glenn Hansard's character, the guy, is actually the same as the character he played in The Commitments many years previous. So that character was something like Standoffish Foster or something like that. So perhaps there was a name there that was connected.
Oh, interesting. Anything else about the writing that you noted?
Well, I did like some clever turns of phrase. Early on in the film, he's playing a song and he says, "It's in C," meaning the key of C. And she says, "I can see that," which I liked that pun.
Dad joke.
Dad joke. The Oscar-winning song Falling Slowly has a great line in it. "I don't know you, but I want you." Because I think that really summarized a lot of what was going on in the film. The two characters meet on the street, and they do have a little bit of interaction. They slowly get to know each other a little bit. But as we see, they really are strangers throughout the majority of this. They share a passion for music, and they share some music together. She helps him in the recording studio when he's making his demo tape. But ultimately, they don't really know a whole lot about each other. And you can actually see this because as they go through the film, he finally goes back to the flat where she stays with her mother and daughter. And that was kind of a obvious pucker moment for him. Wait, what? This girl that I'm interested in has a daughter. She probably has a baby daddy or a husband. What am I doing here? And so I thought that was really clever that lyric in the song really talked about what was going on in the film. Another bit of writing that I really liked was from the category of show don't tell. There's a point where they all pack into a Mercedes estate wagon to test the song, the demo tape in a vehicle. And the middle seat has 3 seats and he sits down on the left and she buckles into the middle and there's no one on the right. So this was maybe subtle. I don't know if a lot of people would have necessarily picked up on it, but you could see that in that moment, there's that intimacy, that physical intimacy. She's sliding over to touch him and to be right next to him. And I think it's pretty obvious that in most cases, most people would leave the gap in between. And there's also the transmission tunnel there, which would make it weird to sit on. So she's going out of her way, but they don't call anything to it. There's no dialogue about it. He doesn't give a look. It's just showing us, the audience, that this is what's going on. And I thought that was really a clever bit of writing.
Nice. I didn't notice that. I thought I think I'm thinking of a later scene where there are 3 people in the back seat, so I don't think I noticed it. Wouldn't it be funny if it's not a case of a purposeful thing? It was just the scene before they shot with the actor there and they said, "All right, Stan, you get out of the car and we'll do scene 34.
Right, or there's a piece of camera equipment there or something.
Yeah.
But let's go with that. Happy accident.
Yeah.
So a little bit humorously, I mentioned earlier there's a scene where she goes to buy batteries in the middle of the night and she comes out of this little bodega. And just so bizarrely to me, this makes no sense, but maybe Dublin has an active rollerblading culture. But there's a bunch of tween girls all wearing these like newsboy hats on rollerblades milling about in front of the store at 1 a.m. in the morning.
I think you're being generous by calling them tweens. They looked 8 years old.
Well, I said it was like a production of Newsies on rollerblades. It was hilarious.
It was hilarious. It kind of took us out of the film for a little bit.
Yeah. Like I said, but is this a really active, 8-year-old midnight rollerblading culture in Dublin?
I think it is because one of the kids spiked the camera, a word I learned on a film set, which means generally actors are not supposed to look into the camera unless you're breaking the fourth wall. And one kid just looked straight at the camera like, what is happening here? So it was another indication. And I think you found confirmation that they did sometimes shoot kind of guerrilla style where they threw up the cameras. So these kids are looking around like, what in the world is going on? And then what I loved is they started following the girl and I could just feel the anxiety in the cameraman and the director, like, oh, kid, don't mess up this shot. Just go away. But so once again, it took this filmmaker out of the film, but in like a fun, amusing way, not in an annoying way.
It reminds me of the story about with Karate Kid, how the director had to bribe the local kids to stay out of the shot. So they say never work with kids or animals. I guess this is why.
Very much, very much. Any other writing things?
One thing that just kind of bumped me, and I reached out to a buddy who knows a little bit more about guitar playing, and he didn't really tell me why this was the case, but the character of the guy, the guitar strings are always super long. And in my understanding, and my friend confirmed, once you mount them, you trim the end because you don't get poked in the eye or anything. And I thought that was interesting. And there was a point where it looked like he was unwinding it. And so I thought, were we supposed to think that he was so poor that he would take the strings off to save the stress on them, the tension on them, to make them last longer? And maybe that was what we're supposed to draw from it, but I've never seen that before. And that just stuck out to me. Another interesting thing that stuck out to me was how many people were wearing scarves. And I know it's a little cold in Dublin, but apparently scarf wearing is very popular.
Yes, the scarf industry did well with this film. So as far as editing, one shot that you pointed out that I agreed was cool is that opening shot. They push in on him as the street performer, and then when they pull out, they reveal that she's standing there listening to him. And I thought that was a cool use of kind of camera movement and editing.
Yeah, I will take a non-editing moment, though, just to mention that the actress who plays the girl has such a great smile that comes across on camera. And I think it's difficult to find smiles that do come across on camera. And even though she's not really known for her acting, I think that was very appealing, that helped us as the audience connect to that character. And you really immediately upon seeing her felt like that you could understand her spirit and what she was bringing to it. So from an editing standpoint, another thing I liked was he had borrowed his father's Triumph motorcycle and taken them for a little ride, and she wanted to ride on it. And so he's very concerned that she would damage it and his father would be very angry at him because that was his most important and most expensive possession. And so she starts into wheedling, I guess you would say, to get him to let her to ride it. And in such a very appealingly childlike way of just trying to, and then there's this edit where she's doing this and all of a sudden cut to her on the bike. So I thought that was a great edit to kind of shortcut that whole process of please, right?
I was so anxious throughout that whole scene. I just kept saying, no, don't let her drive it. Cause I think she says earlier that she has no experience being on a bike. And I'm like, she's going to wreck it. Don't let her do it. And so my stomach was in knots that whole scene. I couldn't wait till the next scene when they cut to he was driving them home.
Yeah. I will also mention that he seemed to be fairly comfortable on the motorcycle, but there's a line of dialogue where I think he said that his father didn't know he had taken it. So that made me extra nervous that she might damage it and there would be a lot going on when he got home.
Absolutely. I felt like the sets were pretty practical and realistic. I would be surprised if they actually filmed like on a soundstage because everything seemed very, like I said, they found apartments and cafes and bodegas and there's a great music store. Isn't there it's like a famous music store?
Yeah, apparently the store where they go to play piano and do a little bit of a duet together is a famous music store there in Dublin, or at least was at the time.
Yeah, I think this is one of those movies where you could say like Dublin was almost like a third character.
I think so. You know what's also interesting is we see movies that are not set in the United States, and there are the strangest bits of American culture that make it into these movies. And about halfway through the film, there's a big party, which apparently was shot inside the director's mother's apartment. And on the table is a coffee mug with Scooby-Doo on it. And I don't get the feeling that was put there to say anything. I think that was just, we had mugs around the house and one of them was Scooby-Doo. And so of all of the things that you think of American culture that would broadcast throughout the world, Scooby-Doo, maybe not the worst.
Yeah. Ruby, Ruby, Roo. Is there anything else that you want to say about the costuming besides the scarf wear?
Well, I did notice that people were put in a lot of dark colors, and that is probably just kind of the style there that those people had, because I don't think they had a tremendous budget. So it was probably bring your own clothes kind of thing. I personally am not as much of a dark color person, so it kind of stuck out in my mind. But I think with the tone of the film, as well as the time of year, it worked well.
I think so. I could feel cold almost watching this film. If I ever go to Dublin, I'm going to bring a scarf and a big heavy coat because it looks cold there. But I think you're right. It played very well with the tone of this film that, she has some kind of drama going on in her life and with the little girl, and everybody seems very poor. Well, maybe not very poor, but like they're just barely able to make rent, or just kind of barely able to keep their head above water. So I think that the costuming lent to, they didn't have flashy bright clothes. It was kind of like a dark, oppressive kind of feeling to it.
Well, also notice that she stole money from her daughter's piggy bank. Now that's
borrowed. I in my mind, she gave it back.
We didn't see her pay it back.
She pays it back.
I would hope so. But that's rough to really feel an appealing emotion for that character when she's stealing from her daughter.
Okay, everybody. I hope you've watched the film. She's borrowing money from her daughter because he gave her music that he wants her to write lyrics to. And so she needs to do that in order to kind of, and potentially he could get a contract out of this. So she could get a writing credit. I mean, that kid's going to be happy when that song goes big, and now she can go to college and pay her back.
Dedicated to little Marta Jr., right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a very charitable way to think about it. But
that's my happy Disney head.
Happy Disney head. I like that place. I just bring that up to say,
it shows the desperation.
I was trying to, and your point that they appear to be people of modest means. And what I find kind of interesting about this is that a movie about a musician filmed in the U.S., even when this film was made, would probably have them listening on an iPhone or maybe across the internet. And so this is a thing where there's this divide between the audience and maybe the filmmakers that I could see a lot of people in the U.S. making a film about a struggling musician, where this musician, I have to get it on Spotify or some plot line like that, where in a lot of places they don't have ubiquitous broadband or access to an iPhone 12. Right. So to me, that was an interesting thing, seeing the CD player, the portable CD player, which is a thing that I'm old enough to have seen be the new thing and now is long gone for most people, I think, in the United States. That to me is interesting, that the story plays as well, even though technologically there might be some slight differences if we made it in a different locale. But it made sense for these characters that was what they were working with.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So now it's time for By the Numbers and our other features. Was there a smoochie in this film?
There was an almost smoochie and a not quite chaste cheek smoochie in this film.
Which can sometimes be very sweet when it's just very simple like that. How about head trauma? Any head trauma?
We had no head trauma in this film, despite there being a chase scene on foot early in the film.
Okay. And then we spoke about the motorcycle, but now it's time for Mike's driving review.
So I did mention the Triumph motorcycle. The positive nature is they wore helmets while on the motorcycle, which is nice and safe. But after he drops her off, he pulls an unsighted U-turn directly in front of traffic. So that one gets a thumbs down. Also, when they're riding in the Mercedes estate wagon, two of the guys pack into or maybe three of them pack into the back of the station wagon with no seatbelts. So that's contraindicated and quite claustrophobic.
Safety first, everybody.
Safety first.
So now we'll run down the numbers. This film was a low budget film at $150,000. It was a very indie film. It is an hour and 26 minutes. It's rated R. It's in the category of drama and romance. We actually did pause. We each paused the film 3 times.
I feel like that's low for me and high for you.
Yes, exactly. the film did quite well. Domestically, it made $9 million, and worldwide, it did $20 million. Now, I say quite well. As an indie filmmaker, that is quite well. As a Marvel studio, that's probably a poor performance, but there you have it.
You know, it'd be a great film is if Marvel made one where Wolverine sang and danced. Wait, it's called The Greatest Showman.
Coming up. Right now, it's available on HBO Max streaming. I think in the month of March, tap into your Irish love. And I think it's a cute little movie. What do you think?
I do too. It's a shorter film. There's not a lot of time investment. And even though it didn't have the traditional kind of Hollywood happy ending, I think ultimately the film is a positive note. And I did like it. The music is, I think, pretty good. Of course, that's a personal taste thing. But I would say, yeah, it's worth a watch.
Yeah. So you guys, drop us a line. Let us know what you thought of Once. If you watched it, comment when we post all our socials about Once. We want to know what you guys think about it. Did you like the music? Are you listening to the music? Check out the music. I think, what's the name of the song that won the Oscar, Mike?
Falling Slowly.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love it. Join us next week where we will be talking about the film Leap Year. So watch it this week so you get, here's your spoiler warning. We're not going to warn you again. And so you can enjoy our breakdown of the movie Leap Year.
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christi and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.